Questions. What are they? That's one. Let's try another. Questions. Where are they? In every walk of life, everywhere you turn, every gap on the page, every unfinished thought, the question, what is a question, is its own answer. That's interesting. Or is it? Questions. Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. With this quote, French author Voltaire François-Marie Arouet shows us that our ability to question the world around us is more important than our ability to merely recite facts and general knowledge, calling into question how we measure intelligence itself. Or at least, this is his ostensible motive. The quote implies something far more interesting when one delves a little deeper. The subtext is that one can answer a question with yet another question, and the subtext of this is that there are some questions which can only be answered with yet more questions. The question I will be posing today is, in my humble opinion, one of these, and it proceeds thusly. What if Spider-Man bit a spider? In the real world, we of course know that the act of biting does not transfer skills or powers between parties. For example, when I was younger, my sister used to bite me often to punish me for feeling sad, or test if I was ready to serve to the rest of the family. Did I gain her powers of patience for her food, or her latent taste for human flesh? No, I simply got very cross at her, and climbed out of the boiling water, strained myself in the sink, and left for my room in the larder to read Spider-Man comics to dull my existential pain. The Spider-Man canon seemingly, at least for the most part, operates under a similar rule, and in fact it serves as one of the few consistencies between the numerous reboots of the series. Evidence for this can be found from the original series of comic books to the 2004 classic Spider-Man 2, where we see that if Parker bites into a succulent hot dog, the hot dog does not gain any skills at all, other than of course that evasive skill of accepting death honourably, which the rest of us can only strive for. However, the very premise of the comic turns this concept on its head. A spider biting a man makes a Spider-Man. For the sake of convenience, I will call this transfer of identity the Peter effect. Clearly, the addition of the Peter effect to the biting in this scenario causes its properties to differ tremendously from those we have come to accept from our misleading everyday lives. Must we revise our theory of what it is to be bitten? Luckily, we are spared from such a fate, with a handy disclaimer courtesy of Messrs Kirby and Lee. The cause of the Peter effect is not the bite itself, but the spider's radioactive venom. It is not inherently the act of biting, but this property within the biter that causes the transfer of properties between those involved. So when we attempt to decipher what may happen if Spider-Man clamped his crunches around a spider, we must conclude that, at least within what we know so far of the Spider-Man universe, there would be some sort of Peter effect as a result, as it has been confirmed countless times that Spider-Man's blood is radioactive, and we've already shown that it is this property in a biter that will cause the Peter effect. My peers may certainly object to this conclusion. Surely, they may cry, only a radioactive spider would be capable of passing on the radioactivity and subsequent abilities, as a spider's venom is naturally passed on to anything it bites, but blood is not. They may, and routinely do, hurl such wretched and foul remonstrances at me on a near daily basis. However, I will plead with you, as I do with them, to think for one moment about the wider implications of having radioactive blood. Assuming one did not die instantly, the radioactivity would easily spread throughout the body, including to the saliva, and so biting something would have a similar effect, regardless as to the spideriness, or indeed manliness, of the biter. Taking the rules as they are presented at the beginning of the story then, if Spider-Man bit a spider, the Peter effect would apply, and the spider would become a half Spider-Man, half spider hybrid, yes? No, you damned fool! Even after confirming what causes the Peter effect, we still have much to learn about its consequences. Please, I beg of you, look to the facts once more before hastily springing to a clumsy falsehood. From what we see of Parker, despite his alter ego's name, he remains far more man than spider after the bite, but this issue is complicated further by the fact that spiders and humans share roughly 50% of their DNA to begin with. Assuming that the post-bite Parker has that 50% DNA shared by humans and spiders, 45% solely human and 5% solely spider, and the spider is 50% human and spider, and 50% solely spider, we would be left with one of two possibilities. The first is that the DNA shared by both species is excluded before 10% of the excess of the biter is shared with the bitee, going from Parker's assumed makeup. From this, our hypothetical Spider-Man to spider bite would result in a 50% human and spider, 4.5% human, and 45.5% spider after the bite. And this certainly seems plausible, but I must remind you that I've merely plucked these figures out of the air, and equally if not more likely is our second possibility, that in the event of a Peter effect, effect. It is wholly random what form the bitee takes. We may have multiple case studies in the form of the Spider-Verse adventures, but it is important to account for survivorship bias. We are only hearing from spider people who've remained very similar to humans, as it is only these hybrids who'd even retain the capacity to become spider people. If the second option is true, which it very likely is, I cannot sugarcoat the situation. We are in a lot of trouble. We've hit a dead end, our question is nonsense, and to gaze into the genetic structure of a Peter-bitten spider is to gaze into the deepest layers of the unknowable. So what next? Well, I feel it is important to remind you here that I'm necessarily extrapolating. Unfortunately, the nature of comic books is that there is a certain level of monologue in the art form, and like the immortal words of American coach Lou Holtz, I never learn anything talking. I only learn things when I ask questions. Were we being told this story by a friend, we would be able to silence them to question these crucial intricacies of the story. However, the fact that there are weeks or even months between releases of Spider-Man means that this is not the case here. As a result, since I can only go so far with my analysis without having to get these questions answered, I would be forced to take one of my assumptions as fact without proof, which is obviously not easy for me to do given this subject's immense importance. Maybe I should submit to my sister's demands, I thought, as she hungrily reminded me of that Franz Kafka quote, "So long as you have food in your mouth, you have solved all questions for the time being." Solving all my questions did seem like an attractive option, especially when faced with so many that shook my worldview to its very core. But then it hit me. All this time I had been answering the wrong questions, battling the wrong Spider-Man villains. While my first would no doubt have earned me Voltaire's scorn had I asked it of him, my next would make him utterly shit his pants. It completely removes the variables we cannot ascertain, and is as follows. What if Spider-Man bit another Spider-Man? This is trivial. Since they share almost all their DNA, the change is negligible, and the result is the very two Spider-Men that we began with, the Spider-Man 2, if you will. And so we simply divide by man, and are left with the answer to our original question. If Spider-Man bit a spider, the result would be 2 spiders, or Spiders 2, 2001. Does this mean that Parker would become a spider if he bit a spider? How would he find a way out of this predicament before the denouement of the issue arc or film in which it takes place? Why would he ever try this? So many questions that indubitably would spawn many, many more, but I haven't the time to confront them here. Instead, I shall conclude by inviting you to ruminate upon that age-old philosophical notion from one Lil Wayne. I'm a gangster, and gangsters don't ask questions.